Alrighty. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Urban Ag Hour. We are so excited that you were able to join us this morning and hear from an amazing speaker. The Urban Agriculture Production Small Scale and Beginning Farmer Program is partnered with USDA NRCS and FSA to offer this series. And today we will hear from our very own Lupine Allen from the Center of Urban Smart Agriculture. I will now hand it over to you, Lupine, and you can take it away from here.
Thank you, Tiffany. Hello, everybody. I can't tell how many people are in here, but I'm very excited to share my presentation with you all. Sorry if I fidget and it's distracting. It helps me give presentations like this. Um, I guess I'll just start with my presentation. If everybody's ready, okay. This is the first time I've done something like this. Can everybody see that? Can you see it, Tiffany?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay. I'm giving you spoilers. All right. Today we're going to be talking about helping insects in general. I know there's a lot of focus on pollinators, but ultimately all insects are incredibly important and play their role in the ecosystem. And so I thought it would be good to give a presentation talking about all of them. So first of all, we just want to go over what insects are facing currently, which is a lot of things. As you can tell by this picture, it's not one big thing. They're getting cut from many different angles. Um, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this shows things like over fertilizing lawns and the runoff that can happen from fertilizer and end up in our waterways and cause algae blooms, which hurts insects and all sorts of animals. Exhaust from cars and factories, urban sprawl, which results in habitat loss, and not just habitat loss, but habitat fragmentation, which is where you can see, I mean, in every suburb, there's, every yard is a little cut off square. And then, like, especially in my neighborhood, there's a park, and the park is separated from other mountain ranges by streets, roads, suburbs. And so the plants and animals that live on that mountain can't exactly have free range of the earth and sometimes end up getting their populations weakened by inbreeding, and just restrained movement in general, and of course, death by cars. Um, we also have invasive species like these fire ants, and I'm not honestly sure what this picture is showing, but invasive species can be a big part in displacing our native insects and reducing the diversity in our ecosystems. Um, Top right, we have climate change. We've all seen that happen a lot. I've seen that happening a lot, especially in the Southwest. Last year, the Palo Verde trees at the park near my house did not make any fruit, which was very worrying for me to see. And that was the first year that quails moved into my neighborhood, and I think that might have been in part to a lack of food that happened that year. So of course, all of these disastrous weather events and just a lack of reliability of insects to find their food sources can definitely drive um, their deaths. Um, Deforestation, just another form of habitat loss for bugs and all sorts of animals. You can see a gazelle over here or deer. Pesticides and big scale mega farms contribute a lot to land waste, land destruction, and loss of wildlife lands. These cows produce a lot of waste and consume a lot of land, and there's better ways to produce our food that aren't as destructive to the environment, which we will be learning about how you can mitigate some of that. So just overall, it's not one thing, it's many things from many different angles. Just a basic rundown. This might remind you of being in elementary school. I wanted to give an example of how insects the stages of their life. And this isn't for all insects. Like you can see at the bottom, this is a specific type of metamorphosis called complete metamorphosis. There's some insects that go through a different type of metamorphosis where they don't necessarily change as dramatically from a larva to an adult that looks completely different from the larva, which would be things like grasshoppers, crickets, and things like cicadas. Basically, their young forms look pretty much like the adult, but they'll shed a couple times and grow wings. But for other insects like beetles, ants, wasps, bees, butterflies, moths, and flies, they start off as an egg, then they hatch into a larva. This is a baby ladybug. And then they pupate, which is the chrysalis that everybody is familiar with for butterflies and moths. Um, and then they hatch as an adult, which usually looks pretty different from the larva. Um, just wanted to give you a basis of the different stages in insects' life, because at different stages, insects will need different things. And so, what do insects need? First thing, plants. Many insects require specific plants to be able to complete their life cycle. Everybody is familiar with the poster child, the monarch butterfly. Um, Many butterflies and moths need a host plant. Many people have planted milkweed to support our monarchs because that is the only plant that they can raise their young on. And so people are familiar with that concept of a host plant because of monarchs, but they don't necessarily understand that that is the case for a majority of insects to need a specific species of plant or even a group of plants, family of plants that they rely on to be able to complete a stage in their life cycle, whether it's their larva or they need to feed on it as an adult. So, if you're worried about being able to provide host plants, the biggest thing you can do is just plant plants that are native to your area, which are plants that have evolved in your ecosystem for millennia and have formed relationships with other local species. Some examples of these are creosote grasshopper that feeds on the foliage as an adult. The blister beetle feeds on brittlebush in the springtime. You might be able to see them soon. Um, they feed on brittlebush in order to breed with each other. And without that, they can't. And so with these specialist insects, they're at even higher risk of going locally extinct in an area because if they don't have their specific host plant, they can no longer thrive in that area. And some might be able to adapt if they have a broad range of host plants that they can use, but that's not always the case. And so these insects are usually the first to be impacted by habitat loss. Even if you replace the plants that were once there with native plants, it still might not have the same diversity that it did when it was an undisturbed ecosystem. This globe mallow bee on the top right, there's globe mallow all over in the spring. I would recommend going near a plant and trying to find one of these guys. They're super cute, and the males sleep in the flowers at night. It is the cutest thing I've ever seen, but they need globe mallow pollen to be able to raise their babies. Um, I've seen some of them visit other mallow species, which is something that we see happen in urban areas where insects are forced to use plants outside of their normal host plant, but there have been some studies that have come out showing that the offspring of these insects is sometimes weaker and more susceptible to being eaten, and less able to pass on their genes than insects that have their preferred host plant. So if you want to help insects, just learn what plants are native to your area and dedicate whatever area you can to help planting those native plants, even if it's a vacant lot near your house, if it's on your balcony, you know. And these plants can be hard to find, but I'll have some resources for you guys if you're curious. Um, Second would be soil. People don't think about this a lot, but soil is super important for insects. It's a place where they breed, they build nests, they pupate underground, And as much as the soil helps insects, insects also help the soil a lot by decomposing organic matter. And when they tunnel through the soil and create their nests, they're also helping to aerate the soil, which brings in not only oxygen, but makes tunnels for water to enter the soil, which makes it much healthier overall and just increases the biodiversity in the soil. And so in our cities, there is a massive amount of pavement, hard surfaces, even just gravel or astroturf that is covering the soil that the insects can't access it any longer. And so if they can't access the soil, then they can't reproduce. And sometimes insects like cicadas or even our desert toads will burrow in the ground, and sometimes they have long hibernations that, with rapid urban expansion, covers the surface of the soil where they had burrowed. And so these cicadas sometimes stay underground for like years. There's the 17-year cicada. And so by the time they come up, they can no longer break free through the surface and end up dying underneath the concrete, which is really sad to think about. Um, so I'm very much into projects that open up the soil. I recently removed the gravel in my yard, which I am very much aware that not everyone can do because it's very labor intensive. But even if you can just open a little section of your yard to open up that soil, that will be very helpful for insects to be able to burrow in. Um, and soil health in general just is really good for capturing carbon and mitigating climate change. And if you grow plants, nurturing the soil is one of the best things you can do for long-term health of your plot of land and your plants, and giving them more nutrition, helping them retain water easier, especially with incoming droughts. It helps us have a lot more food security when we take care of the soil. Um, so that is super important for us and insects. And that's something I want to drive home a lot, is just everything that helps insects helps people, because they are the basis of the food chain, the ecosystem. They clean the air, the water, the soil. They are the basis of the food web besides plants. And so anything we can do to them comes back to us tenfold. And as we're seeing insects decline rapidly, it's also negatively impacting our ability to produce food very rapidly in a frightening way. Um, so third thing, most important, would be dead plant matter. And this also applies to helping the soil regenerate. Um, so leaving the leaves is a slogan you might have heard. There's also people like no mow May, which I have some feelings about, but it's on the right track. But leaving the leaves is just about fighting that impulse a lot of us have to bag up all the organic matter on our property and toss it into the landfill. Which I understand a lot of people have HOAs, and that can be really challenging to, allow things to take their natural courses. But if you can even just take the leaf litter in your yard and dedicate a corner to it, that will be very helpful for insects. Because not only does it provide food for insects, but many larvae pupate in leaf litter and are hiding underneath that surface. And so when you rake up your leaves, you're not just raking up leaves, but also many insects and many like moth pupa that may have emerged the next spring that would have been food for birds and squirrels. And when you take that away, then the food system is a little bit worse, and these other animals can't support themselves as well. And it also, leaf litter is a cover for the soil that protects it from the sunlight. It protects it from evaporative loss of water. And so by leaving leaves on the soil of the surface, it helps protect the soil and eventually breaks down and creates a lot of nutrients for that soil too. So this is an example of some dead plant matter. Stems and dead twigs. If you have sunflower stalks, elderberries, any plant with pithy, hollowish stems, agave stalks, yucca stalks that flower and then die, are really good habitat for a lot of bees and insects. And a lot of people have issues with carpenter bees nesting in their roof. I have some carpenter bees. I honestly just leave them. There's only about five of them, and they're not doing a lot of damage, but having alternatives for them to nest in, like dead plant material, makes your roof look a little bit less appetizing to them and is a good option. Leaf litter, as I said, adds nutrients to the soil, provides foods for insects, and protects them from predators and harsh weather. My chickens also really like leaf litter because they know that's where the bugs are and they love to scratch around and hunt for everything that lives in there. Deadwood. People think of deadwood on their trees as being unsightly or a nuisance, and sometimes it can be a danger, if that deadwood you feel is going to fall on your house or your car. But even if you can just take the dead branches and again dedicate a pile of them in your yard where they can go through their natural process of decomposition, that is really wonderful. Um, you might see deadwood that's riddled with these small holes, and that's from usually longhorn beetles that burrow in the wood. So they're getting a first use out of it, and then the hole that they leave ends up being a home for other animals like leafcutter bees, which is really cute and really fun to see. And if you have kids, like your kids will love this stuff. And it will just open up the world so much to them. And it's really important on raising our next generation of people who care about the environment, and who can notice all those small things in nature that go unnoticed, that go unappreciated, and finding appreciation for these things that are usually seen as waste is really important. In nature, there is no waste. It's something that humans have created. Everything in nature gets recycled. And so, as much as we can stay within that system, the healthier our soil, our farms will be, and the healthier we will be as people. And so, the last thing that insects need is each other. So I want to drive home the point that every being, all of us, relies on others to survive, and we are inseparable from those that feed, clothe, and house us. In the insect world, this might look like blister beetle larvae that I mentioned earlier. So the adults they have a relationship with brittlebush, so they need that first relationship to be intact in order to mate. And then after that need is met, the females will fly away from the site and go lay their eggs in the soil. As we mentioned, the soil is important. And then their larvae have to find grasshopper eggs underground to eat, to become adults. And so there are multiple relationships happening in every stage of an insect's life, every stage of our lives, every stage of a frog's life that make us inseparable from the world around us. Um, and so it's just these links in the chain that, people might think, oh, what does it matter if this grasshopper doesn't live? But if that grasshopper doesn't live, then the blister beetle can't live, and everything up from that point in the food chain struggles because of that broken relationship. And so these base relationships are really important. Another example is mud daubers. You might have seen these around, might have been scared because of seeing a skinny little wasp. You might have seen these building their nests above your door. I have one above my door, and she is totally docile. Most wasps are solitary, just like this wasp, meaning they don't build a hive. So she doesn't have any queen to defend. So as long as you leave her alone, she will completely ignore you. I have even crouched down an inch away from these wasps, watching them collect mud, and it is really fascinating and really cute. And when they spread the mud on their houses, they curl their antennas and make little me 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 sounds. It's just really fascinating. But they only raise their babies off of spiders. And so if you don't have spiders in your yard, you won't have mud daubers. And spiders are the one of those insects that we know is beneficial for their hunting of other insects. And that is just another link in the food chain. And as insects struggle, something we might see a lot is an increase in pest insects. And so if you're struggling with aphids or um, mealybugs, any sort of pest on your farm, it's often a result of imbalance, because these predatory insects are also extremely sensitive to pesticides, especially spiders. Um, and so just having a holistic view of realizing that these aphids might not be, the balance is out of whack. And so supporting these predators is supporting our food production. Um, and aphids, believe it or not, are actually also really important to the food chain when they're not completely out of control. They are sometimes the first source of sugary liquids in the spring before the flowers open, and many insects will rely on them to have energy in the spring. And of course, they are food for ladybugs and lacewings. So even the things we think of as pests have their role to play when they are not completely dominating, you know? And then speaking of aphids, um, some ants, you guys probably know this, it can be incredibly frustrating. Um, I've had many ants swarm me for trying to do anything in the yard. Um, but I'm still fascinated with them and enamored by them and know that they have their place. But ants will actually farm aphids, and leafhoppers and caterpillars, insects that produce that sugary liquid I talked about. And in turn, they will protect them from predators like us, which can be very frustrating, but it is still just fascinating to see those relationships. Um, and then just wanted to leave you with the question, who do you rely on to complete your life cycle? To be thinking about that all the time, because we aren't alone and we're not inseparable. Here's where I flip the script on you and talk about what they really need, which is cultural change. So, what I mean by this is it's wonderful to put a pollinator garden in your yard or at your community college, and doing all these projects, but we can't do them alone. And so we need to help each other have a general shift in the way that we think about life, the way that we perceive our food systems, the way that we respect the soil and life as a whole, to really focus on how important it is to protect these things and go back into our role as stewards of the land, which we have always been as humans. People forget that that is our role because of how destructive we have been, but the destruction we've caused is a very recent phenomenon in our human history. And for a majority of our history, we were the caretakers of the land, not the destructors of it. And so this is just about moving back to that relationship with the land. So, some ways that you might do that. This is just, I mean, of course, this is a lifelong practice of leaning back into our roles, but this is just a basic overview of what it means to lean into place and to really just begin to connect with where you are. Um, I'm someone who has grown up in Arizona my whole life and only really started paying attention to the plants and the animals that have been around me my whole life only about 2 or 3 years ago. Um, and so we're all, you know, but once you start seeing it, you can't go back, and it's just this love that you start to feel and this connection, and that connection to the land makes us want to take care of it more. So some ways you can start building that connection is first your land. What biome do you live on? What are the geographical features? What are the now like the mountains around you? What are their names? And not just the names that our government has give them, but their pre-colonial names. Um, What is their significance to the indigenous people of the area? What did your city look like before development? I actually took a class recently where we were working in this field creating a food forest, and we noticed that the field was full of river rocks. And I had thought that someone had just dumped a bunch of river rocks there, but my mentor told me to imagine that all of the buildings, all of the walls were gone, and to just see the contours of the land before development. And I could see all these mountain ranges around us. And he was talking about how he believed there might have been some sort of riparian flow there, some sort of waterway or mountain runoff that had run through that. And I had just never thought about the land in that way because we are so, when you're down in the weeds, it's kind of hard to see out of it. Um, and so when we're down in these developed urban spaces, it can be kind of hard to remember what this land was like before said development. Um, so it's been a constant practice of um, just training myself to kind of see through it with this X-ray vision. It can be really difficult because sometimes there isn't much of that natural environment left. Um, but you can feel it coming through in some places in the nooks and crannies. And local indigenous museums can be helpful too. Some of them are not the best. I don't know how to pronounce the indigenous name, but what was previously called Pueblo Grande, um, was a really great museum to go to that kind of opened my eyes, and you can just see the incredible dissonance being next to these very old sacred sites where the adobe structures are still standing right next to the concrete canal and right next to Sky Harbor, and just seeing the way that those two timelines clash with each other and knowing that all of this development is built right on top of history. It has not gone anywhere, even if it is smushed underneath the development, it is right beneath the surface. And so leaning back into that history and not forgetting it and tying ourselves to it, remembering it any way we can, is really important to learning the place that we live and the history of that place. Um, so secondly, the peoples of the lands. Whose lands do you live on? For example, here we're on the lands of the Atum people. Um, and those are unceded lands. People are still fighting. People have fought in my lifetimes against the Loop 202 highway when I was young and I didn't know that was happening, but there are constant battles against development that are happening in our communities that a majority of us are unaware of. And these struggles are still ongoing all the time. And so just learning whose lands you're on, how you can support people, what are their current fights, um, how can you help defend them, and in what ways is genocide continuing? Because it is not over. Cultural genocide is still continuing through the border, the U.S. Mexico border, cutting the O'odham lands in half and not allowing people to freely practice their culture by traveling back and forth. Um, People are constantly um, subjected to border patrol scrutiny and violence and surveillance. And so just learning the ways that you can um, just listen to these people and how we can fight with them. Because these are the original people of the land that we live on, and they know it better than anybody. Um, so there's a lot to learn. Um, Third is non-human beings. So what are the beings near you? That's just learning plants, animals, even the fungi. Um, I have yet to learn a lot about fungi, especially in the desert. We're lacking a little bit, but northern Arizona is abundant with fungi. Um, learn about their seasons. I have only recently learned about their seasons. And even just in the past 2 years, I have seen the way that the cycles have been disrupted. Um, and I started this path through foraging, learning to forage, which brought me to learning about the plants of this place. And I learned about saguaro fruit and I wanted to go harvest it. And then I realized that none of the saguaros near me were actually healthy enough to consistently produce fruit. And so I didn't feel that I could harvest it because it's the way that saguaros are struggling in our urban heat island is immense. I don't know if you've noticed a lot of saguaros dying near you, but it's something I've seen a lot. As they get weakened, their systems, they open their stomata at night, which is their it's pores for plants. They open their stomata at night to do gas exchange where they release the oxygen into the air and water, but they can only do that if it gets below 90 degrees at night. And with all of this hardscape and concrete that traps in the heat, saguaros are not able to do that. And other plants like agaves, a lot of them have this type of photosynthesis that they're not able to complete because of the way that heat is being trapped. And so they are struggling greatly um, because of this. And so just being able to notice those things makes it easier for us to, first of all, try to find solutions. I saved seeds from the only Palo Verdes that made seed last year to try to plant this year, hoping they would have some sort of resistance to whatever's happening. But to be able to do that, we have to notice the way that these cycles are being disrupted in the first place and listen deeply to what the beings are telling us in order to try to assist them. Um, um, Not all beings that live here are original to this land. Some of you might see globe chamomile or stinknet, the little carrot leaf looking plant with yellow flowers on top. That is a plant that is from Africa originally and was part of the landscaping trade and has since uh, escaped and spread very quickly over the desert and is a major fire hazard because when it dies, it doesn't disintegrate, it leaves its skeleton behind, which creates a lot of fuel for our extreme heat and fires that are happening. Um, but not all of these introduced species are created equal. You know, they all have their different roles to play. Some of them are becoming naturalized. Some of them have uses to the original species that lived here. But just listening to the landscape and seeing the ways that these beings are interacting with each other and learning about where they came from, and learning the way that we interact with our own landscape and the effects that we have on it, because as it stands right now, it's not great, but we can definitely change that. And finally, your water. This is something I'm still learning about because I used to drive by the canal every day on the 101. And this is embarrassing, but I had no idea what it was until I was like 18. I would see it every day and be like, why do they have a moat around the school bus center? Why are they protecting it with a moat? And so just don't feel embarrassed. Like, we are not really taught about these things very well. Like when you're in school, I don't remember really learning about the animals or the people, definitely not the people that lived here, or taught about like Africa savanna animals and like learn about giraffes and dinosaurs. But a lot of the things we learn don't actually apply to our situation. Um, and so I had no idea where my water came from. And I'm still figuring that out. But I know it's from the Salt River now. Um, but outside of just the main river that we get our water from, there's also riparian habitats, which are um, creeks and smaller offshoots, just these ribbons of life that flow through the desert and are incredibly important to a massive amount of species and to migrating animals to be able to have that water. But over 90% of Arizona's riparian habitats have been lost to development. And that is really scary and really bad, as you can imagine, for all of our wildlife. Um, there's creeks that I visit that have been running dry, you know, um, and it's just it's not good. Um, so that's also really affects our security when it comes to water in a state that's already prone to drought and is a desert. Um, and not only are animals affected, but by poisoning water, we had talked about fertilizer runoff earlier and pesticide runoff. Um, all of these things can contribute to poisoning our water supply, water that's near factories, even the, exhaust that's on our roads that then leaches into the groundwater. So many things can leach into our groundwater. And Arizona has very, very loose water groundwater pumping laws. Um, and so that's something that's happening a lot in rural areas where the groundwater is just being sucked dry by these massive companies that have zero regulation going on. Um, and even the damming of the Salt River um, caused massive disruption um, for the peoples that lived here, where flowing water is a necessity and has dried up, the river downstream. Um, Even when settlers first came here and started planting water-hungry plants along the river upstream and diverting a lot of that water for agriculture upstream, um, resulted in famine and death for a lot of indigenous people, often peoples in the lower regions of the river. And so this history of hoarding water is very deeply tied in Arizona. And our water is still inequitably distributed to people. People have been fighting for their water rights for a long time and still aren't getting the water that they need. Um, so that goes back to local um, fights that you can be a part of and just becoming aware of where your water's coming from. On an individual level, it's good not to waste water. It's good to form a relationship with water that is respecting it as a resource and not wanting to waste it. But ultimately, if these companies are given free reign of our groundwater and nothing is done to stop polluting of that groundwater, um, then on the individual level, we are a very small percentage of what is being done to the water here. Um, but with water, another thing that ties to this is the hardscapes I had talked about earlier. In urban areas, most of our water cannot infiltrate into the soil. It ends up causing flooding. And in most cities, the way that we have developed to mitigate that is by um, diverting the water in massive, concrete washes and then just shoving all that water into the sewer as fast as possible. And then we pump municipal water to irrigate all of our plants. And this is kind of a very backwards solution. Um, and so a better way to deal with all of this water that's collecting on these hard surfaces would be, first of all, having less hard surfaces. But secondly of all, um, gray water and storm water infrastructure, green stormwater infrastructure that actually takes that diverted water and uses it to water native landscapes, instead of just sending it down the drain. Tucson is a really great example of this. If you ever go down and visit Watershed Management Group, they have some amazing stuff going on down there and just learning about rainwater harvesting it's not just barrels and gutters. There's so much more you can do with it. In my front yard, I have created some rainwater basins with the help of my friends that are a passive strategy of catching rainwater, um, where the rain infiltrates into the ground instead of into a tank, and it thereby irrigates native food plants. So I have landscaped my front yard with native plants that are also edible for people. And one out of five desert plants is actually edible, which is incredible. People think of the landscape of the desert as a barren wasteland, but that could not be further from the truth. Um, just because one out of five are edible doesn't mean they all taste really good, but many of them are incredible, like Palo Verde mesquite, amazing plants. Um, and so that's just one way that on a personal individual scale, I have seen biodiversity increase so rapidly just by putting plants in a place where no plants were growing, and especially native plants. Um, and right now, my wolfberry, it is covered in aphids, and I let the aphids live. And then spiders came, and then ladybugs came. And I don't prune my bushes. I minimally prune my bushes so that they can have their natural growth form, because that results in more flowers, more fruit. And when shrubs are pruned into this, extremely dense shape that we see a lot of in the city, where it's called like hedging. Um, It's too dense to where birds can't seek refuge, other animals can't seek refuge in the foliage, which is incredibly important for shade, especially in the heat of the summer, being able to crawl through those branches. So that's just another little side note about pruning. But yeah, having the most natural growth form you can for your plants, um, is also helpful. And then last slide. Um, So that previous slide was about building our relationships to the land. All of us already has a relationship. It's just about transforming that and building it and deepening, strengthening that relationship, and healing it, because a lot of times the relationship we have right now is not healthy. Um, and so first step would just be assessing your current relationships. Just think about all the relationships you're in, and there are so many. Um, Who do you eat? Who is your shelter made of? Who grows the food you eat and makes the items you buy? Who are your friends, your boss, your family? Just listing out, thinking of all the ways that humans and non-humans touch your life every day. The relationships, even to landscapes, water, land, mountains, um, the gravel in your front yard, even. Where did that gravel come from? It came from somewhere. The minerals in our technology, these are all tied back to us. And it can feel overwhelming, but ultimately it's been very grounding to me to feel like I actually understand and don't feel like things just go on and I just take what I'm given, and to actually understand the relationships that you're in and how you can shift them to be healthier. And so second, the question of consent. Are your relationships consensual? And if they're consensual, are they healthy? And um, this is a very interesting question of what consent could look like in non-human beings. I have a really good pamphlet written by Christine Breivik that I love that talks about this stuff. But this is just theory or whatever. But some believe that a being's disappearance or lack of health may indicate the withholding of consent. For example, crop failure, disease in factory farming, drought, disappearance of fish from a river, or deer from the forest. Um, so just some ways to think about how consent could work in animals that don't explicitly say yes. Um, and just ask yourself, do we truly consent to the conditions that we are under and that we place on others? Because just because we go along with things, just because we are forced to buy things that are causing harm down the supply chain doesn't mean that we truly consent to these relationships. And just thinking about the ways that we would change these relationships if we had the power to, and what that power would look like. And third, shifting towards reciprocity. Um, so reciprocal relationships are characterized by a mutual benefit that both parties experience. They're a flow of give and take on both ends, a cycle of gifts. And how might we move towards this? So I don't have an answer for that. That's just something to leave you with, is thinking about your relationships in terms of not just take, but giving back for everything and making sure that we care for the earth so that it can care for us as long as we live for future generations. Um, Braiding Sweetgrass is a really good book to read for an introduction on reciprocity. Um, but I think that's it. I think I've left you guys hopefully with a lot of things to think about. Um, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Lupine, for that wonderful presentation. Just like Lupine said, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We have about 15 minutes for a Q&A session, so ask away.
Someone's sending resources. Okay.
Yes, we also have a lot of resources in the chat. Jared sends out some wonderful resources, so don't forget to check those out as well.
No, yeah, these are wonderful. Thank you,
So
Jared.
it's okay with you, Lupine. I have a couple
Yeah,
questions for you.
yeah,
And my
yeah.
main one, first of all, I love your presentation. It was amazing. It
Thank
opened
you.
up a lot of different worlds and seeing this whole thing as a biological ecosystem that is very, very heavily intertwined and very integrated with each other. So how would one who is interested and because there's so many different aspects and each one is a massive subject on its own, right?
Yeah.
So what would your advice be on like how would one start? Like let's say, would you start with considering like the diversity of insects and like finding out like, hey, let me just find out what is the diversity of insects within my little biosphere or the native plants that are there. Or maybe kind of consider or look into structures or look into water or like how would you say somebody could kind of get their toes wet in a way into kind of understanding more about their native or local native environment and like what they can do to start without being like uber overwhelmed, I guess. Maybe
Yeah.
go take a hike on a
Yeah,
mountain
no,
or
yeah, for
something.
sure. I mean, I started with just plant walks. That was the first thing that taught me about my landscape. And this kind of goes with Sam Berry's question I see in the chat. Sam asked, are there any good resources for native insect and pollinator identification? And so, yeah, if you want to get started, just even trying to understand the small piece of land wherever you are, iNaturalist is a really good app for identifying any sort of living thing. They have a lot of experts on there. So they have a feature where the app, it's kind of like a, I don't know if it's AI or what, but it like tries to match the picture you took with what species it might think it might be, which can be very helpful, not always accurate. And if it isn't, a lot of times an expert will come in and correct and actually tell you what that thing is that you saw. And so that was really helpful for me at the beginning to start learning the plants and animals that were around me. And also, I really recommend just getting, yeah, hands-on sensory experience, not only just learning the plants through sight and taking pictures of them on an app, but like really touching them, smelling them. What shapes do they have? What type of, some of them have crazy, like unique growth forms and just, learning them as individuals. Um, and so if you wanted to get started, creating habitat on your little piece of land or what, sorry, there's a piece of fuzz floating. Um, yeah, really any way you can. That could be, you could start digging basins in your yard. You could get a tiny little potted plant of a native plant. Um, Anything you can do to start. Um, but really, yeah, just start with being curious and open and receiving feedback from the land that you're on. And it will open itself up to you and you will, I mean, I am learning infinitely on my tiny little front yard. Things just constantly reveal themselves to me. Um, so yeah, just be curious, go outside. There's also this Thursday, tomorrow, there will be a native plant sale at Scottsdale Community College, um, which is awesome because in Phoenix, we actually have a pretty big lack of native plant selection in nurseries. And their plants are super cheap. It's $8 for 1 gallon. And they also have a really cool place called the Center for Native and Urban Wildlife on campus, where you can learn about plants and Sonoran Desert animals. There's also the Maricopa Native Seed Library, where you can get 3 seed packets a month of native seed, which is awesome. And they also have, like seed packaging events, seed collecting events, if you want to learn more about native plant gardening. They do events on that. Um, So yeah, just providing those first basic things, the soil, the plants, and letting those plants go through their life cycle and have their dead material decompose. Those 3 things, you'll be good. And by planting plants, you're usually opening up the soil anyway. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good place to start. You don't have
Yeah,
to
I
go
agree.
yeah.
I like it. It's really good. That's for me, honestly, I accidentally created a natural habitat for carpenter bees.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
my husband, he chopped down a tree in our backyard and he stacked them all up real nice. It was pretty good. It's like height of my chin, as long as me, like 5 foot long. And he wanted to use them as firewood. Well, we never really do fires in our backyard because it's just always so warm. And even in the
Yeah,
winter, we're just like, then it's too cold to want to go out there. And it over like maybe 4 years or so, it became a habitat for carpenter bees. And so I see them in there and I follow them every year and just and it looks really pretty and we leave it there. And it was like an accidental thing, but I would say even in that way is so quickly and easily can you just start, helping the ecosystem that's local in that
absolutely.
way too.
I'm
Um,
actually Oh, I was just gonna say I go through my neighbor's big trash and I take pieces of wood out of their pile and put it in my yard. So if you guys want free wood for habitat, that's another good thing to do where with wood that would be going to the landfill.
yeah,
Um,
I
I see
agree.
another question from John. Um, what's one good book you would recommend to read regarding on this topic? Quite honestly, I did not learn a lot of this through books. A lot of articles, a lot of native plant and insect websites, like the Arizona Native Plant Society. Um, but as I said before, Braiding Sweetgrass by I think it's Robin Wall Kimmerer, I can't remember the last name, is a really good book. Just on reciprocity and then for insects, I don't know. I really like this book called The Bees in Your Backyard, which is just a massive book full of so many fun pictures of like the incredible diversity of bees. But like, sorry if that didn't exactly answer your question, but yeah, I think you'll find a lot of resources out there if you're curious.
Awesome. I'm gonna throw the Arizona Native Plant Society website in there because I think that's a really
Nice.
good one.
Yeah, I've been
Um,
using that one for landscaping too on their plant
yeah.
list.
Well, to close out, we've got 5 minutes left, but this is a really huge topic, a lot of things to think about. Uh, so one thing I think we should leave ourselves with on this particular topic is what would happen if insects went extinct?
Oh, it was
The big
really bad.
question, right? Like, if we think about
Well,
this subject in that perspective, I think is very useful for understanding just the gravity of trying to keep our ecosystem thriving as much as we possibly can. So yeah, what would happen if insects went extinct?
um, so would we. That's really all it's
At the bottom line, right?
yeah. I mean, maybe we could live in like a metal cube for like a few months trying to duke it out, but yeah, it'd be very, very catastrophic.
Um, Lastly, do you know of any like getting involved politically? Like, is there any sort of advice for learning about new things that are going to pass that is going to harm like a natural habitat, like voting, that sort of thing, and like keeping up to date, at least in your county, on those particular subjects?
Hmm. Quite honestly, I'm not usually involved in that kind of political action. I am more of a direct action type of person. So I don't have a lot of resources on that, unfortunately.
All good. But think about it.
I
Voting
will.
and extinction.
Yeah.
I'll go. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you, everybody, for listening and for being here.
All
I
right. Well, thank you so much, Lupine, for that wonderful presentation. We definitely learned a lot today and we have a lot to think about. And thank you again, everyone, for attending this month's Urban Ag Hour. We really hope that you enjoyed it and we hope to see you next month on April 23rd. The registration link will be coming soon. And we will put that out in our newsletter and post it on our Instagram when that comes out. And we also have a link for the survey in the chat. So please take that, let us know how we did, and let us know topics that you'd like to hear about in the future. Again, thank you, Lupine, and thank you everyone for coming, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.